Greetings, Poke people. Ichigo90 here. A while back, I did a hardcore Nuzlocke of Pokemon Red, where I used only Ice types. Not only did I win that challenge, I did it completely deathless. So today, I'm continuing. I am moving to Pokemon Crystal and doing the same challenge. I got to Elm's lab and then picked up my seal. I named it Ahab and made my way over to Mr. Pokemon's house. He gave me the egg and I began to make my way back to Elm's lab. However, on the way back there, I ran into some punk kid with a Cyndaquil. He did his best, but Ahab's headbutts were just too much. When we got back to the lab, we found out that the red-headed kid had stolen the Cyndaquil. The officer on the scene wants to know if we've seen anyone who matches the description of the suspect, and it just so happens that we have, and we even somehow know his name. The person they're looking for is Giovanni Jr. So with that mystery solved and the case being labeled as never to be addressed again, Elm suggests that we take on the gym challenge, and it's time to head over to the first gym in Violet City. Along the way, we watch some random guy casually catch a level 5 Dragonite with a single Pokeball, at full health by the way. We then pick up a Lapras, which requires us to lower its HP to red and throw 3 Pokeballs. So that guy was for sure hacking. Anyway, we name the Lapras Nessa and then go say hi to youngster Joey. And when we finally reach Violet City, we climb up the Sprout Tower and acquire ourselves a Smoochum, which we name Betty. She doesn't do much against Faulkner because Nessa just sweeps his whole team. As a reward for getting the Zephyr badge, Elm calls us and tells us to pick up a Pokemon egg from the center nearby. That egg hatches into a Delibird that we name Shade. So now it's on to Azalea Town and the Slowpoke Well. After Kurt attempts and fails to be useful, we track down a Swinub. We call it Wilbur and clear out the Slowpoke Well before charging into Bugsy's gym. As usual, 2/3 of Bugsy's team is a complete joke and the only real threat is Scyther. Fortunately, the level cap is 16 and Betty learned Powder Snow, which is super effective against Scyther's flying type. Unfortunately, Fury Cutter is super effective against Betty's psychic type. It's fine though because Nessa is an absolute tank and Body Slam does tons of damage. And that's enough to let us pick up the Hive badge. As we leave town, however, Giovanni Jr. comes in and challenges us to a battle. Betty is able to deal with Ghastly without too much difficulty, and Quilava presents a bit more of a problem, so we have to switch over to Ahab to deal with it using Headbutt. However, thanks to the Leer that we switched in on, Ahab has to switch over to Nessa. Zubat doesn't give us nearly as much of a problem though, and Giovanni Jr. is defeated. And that brings us to Goldenrod City and Whitney. Nessa is able to handle the Clefairy with ease and then puts Miltank to sleep before body slamming it into oblivion, which means that the plain badge is ours. Nothing else happens between here and Ecruteak, so let's just go ahead to the Burn Tower. Because there, we meet Giovanni Jr., who blames us for the Pokemon he wants not being in the tower. He challenges us to a battle and leads off with Haunter, which is a problem because when Nessa learned Body Slam, I pressed A too fast and overwrote Water Gun. So I have nothing to hit this thing with. I go for Confuse Ray and he uses Curse. Which is fine because I had to switch out anyway and go over to Wilbur, who freezes the Haunter with Powder Snow and then is able to finish it off. His Magnemite is annoying because of Sonic Boom, but not exactly difficult. His other Pokemon are much less problematic, and now we can go challenge Morty. Morty presents a unique problem for this run. His team is entirely composed of the Ghastly line, despite Miss Drevis being introduced in this generation. Seriously, I don't understand what Game Freak was thinking by having literally half of the Johto gym leaders not have Johto Pokemon as their ace. Why? Anyway, my best offense here is Betty with her Psychic type and access to Confusion. However, Morty's Ghost type moves are super effective on Betty, who is not exactly super bulky right now. The level cap here is 25, and I have Betty just shy of leveling up to 26. This is fine because I'm entering the battle at the appropriate level. There is no rule about leveling up during the battle, which will happen as soon as I OHKO the first Ghastly with Confusion. The Haunter that comes out after is similarly easily taken down, and then comes the real threat. Gengar. This thing is much faster and much tankier, and the real problem is that it has both Hypnosis and Dream Eater. So the strategy I decide to implement is to stall out Hypnosis by switching back and forth between Nessa and Shade, abusing the tendency of the AI to go for Dream Eater against a sleeping opponent, and wanting to put an opponent to sleep if it can. And that eventually opens the door for Ahab to be able to come in and take the Gengar down. And with some clever switching around, Betty is able to come in on his final Haunter and get us the Fog Badge. Not the prettiest performance, but it works. When we get to Olivine, we find Giovanni Jr. accusing Jasmine of being weak for prioritizing the health and wellness of another living being over her career, which means it's time for us to climb the lighthouse and speak to her ourselves. She tells us about Amphi keeping the sea lit at night and asks us to go to Cianwood to pick up some medicine. Which, of course, we do, and while we're there, we take the opportunity to fight Chuck. Oh, also, Betty evolves along the way, which is a huge upgrade over Smoochum. And with the power increase we just received, she easily KOs both of Chuck's Pokemon. Yeah, you heard that right. I said both. Not all, both. Because for some reason, the 5th gym leader only has 2 Pokemon. I mean, Hitmontop is right there, guys. Why is the Johto fighting gym not using it? Anyway, Storm Badge in hand, it's time to go back to Olivine. After climbing up the lighthouse again, Jasmine gives Amphi the medicine and is apparently satisfied with the result enough to return to the gym. And while training for Jasmine's level cap, Wilbur evolves into Piloswine and Ahab into Dugong. Betty puts Jasmine's first Magnemite to sleep, allowing Wilbur to come in and just tear through it. Steelix is scary, but not insurmountable. And the second Magnemite, though, is able to hit Wilbur with a Sonic Boom, which leaves him with just 1 singular HP. So we go back over to Betty to finish it off with Powder Snow and Confusion. And with that, the Mineral Badge is ours. So we're on to the next gym, but before we get there, we have to do a bunch of side quests with Team Rocket. Starting with battling the Red Gyarados. Before doing that, however, there are Shellder in this lake, so of course we have to find one and catch it. It'll be a while before we actually use this guy, so in the meantime, have fun in the box, Clamu. And for those of you who are wondering, the Red Gyarados was a shiny Wooper, which we can't use cause not an ice type. Somehow though, the Wooper was still holding the red scale, so we go ahead and show that to Lance, and that prompts him to break into the local Circle K and Hyper Beam the cashier in the face before blasting a hole into the basement. And there are some crazy statues down there that summon Team Rocket guys to come and fight, but it's fairly easy to turn those off. That's not the end of it though. We run into Lance again on the second basement level, and he tells us that we have to track down a couple of passwords by beating up the other people who are in the basement with us. So we get those passwords and find our way to the boss's office and find some guy. He does his best, but his team is quite sad, especially compared to Jasmine's. The Murkrow in the corner tells us the final password we need, and we make our way back to that main door that we passed earlier. And after fighting off a couple more Team Rocket execs and shutting down the machine, we have some work to do. You see, Johto is famous for being kinda weird. Among the more well-known and widely discussed of those reasons is the weird level curve. Jasmine's level cap was 35. Up next is Price, and his level cap is 31. Now alongside that Shellder we picked up at the lake, we also found a Sneasel. And those are the only two Pokemon not currently overleveled for the next gym. And Shellder is not great. So we need to find a Water Stone. Only problem is there's not really an easy way to get one before the league. There is a solution though. On Route 42, just outside of Mahogany, we can find Fisherman Tully. By beating him and registering his number in our phone, he'll call us every now and then. All we need to do at that point is fly back to New Barktown and shift daylight savings time on and off until Tully calls us. On one of those calls, he gives us a Water Stone, which we can use to evolve Shellder. So now we have two decent enough Pokemon we can use to fight Price. Price leads off with Steel, a great choice. Clamu happens to be female, so we can use Attract to immobilize it a few times while we set up our defense. And when we're satisfied with that, we start throwing Surf at Price's Seal until he goes down. Following that, Price sends out his Dewgong. So we attract the Dewgong like we did the Seal and then begin to surf it. Getting the crit is nice. Anyway, Piloswine comes out and gets hit with Attract and then lives a surf in red, but it can't hold out forever and we finally have the Glacier badge. And then, no sooner do we leave the gym than we get a call from Elm telling us that something weird is happening at the radio tower. He suggests that maybe Team Rocket is behind it, but then immediately rejects that idea, so he's as unreliable as ever. Oh well, over to the radio tower. So we fight our way through some Team Rocket grunts and up the tower. We get to the director's office and find a Rocket executive just kinda chilling there. This guy, for whatever reason, has a bunch of coughing. It would be really nice if Wilbur had any ground moves at all, but alas. Even without having a ground move though, strength does a lot and is enough to tear through his team. We also get a bit lucky with getting a freeze when he sends in wheezing, which is nice considering it has considerably more bulk than the coughing, to no one's surprise. So we're done, right? Well, no. He reveals that the real director has been stashed away in the underground warehouse, and rather than informing the police about this and letting them do their job, we decide that it's a brilliant idea for a 10-year-old child to run in there completely unprepared and take on the mafia as far away from public view as it's possible to be. And when we get in there, Giovanni Jr. comes crashing in. Nessa took care of his Golbat with ease, and then Wilbur dealt with Magnemite. Gio's Sneasel fell before Wilbur, and Ahab came in to headbutt Quilava into submission. Haunter tried to trap us in with him, but only ended up trapping himself in with us, and now we can get back to the job we are completely unqualified to do. We finally managed to find the director, so that means we're done, right? Again, no. The guy decides it's a great idea to give the actual child the key to his office and ask them to clear the Team Rocket out of the tower altogether. So, back to the tower we go. And we find some more Rocket executives, at least one of which we've encountered before back in the Circle K in Mahogany. However, none of them put up much of a fight, and they all end up going down rather quickly. So, now we're done, and we can go to the 8th and final gym of Johto. Claire, the Dragon-type gym leader. This should be pretty easy for us since we're super effective against most of her Pokemon. Nono obliterates the first Dragonair, and Claire responds by sending in Kingdra. Water Dragon is one of the best typings in the game, having several resistances and only being weak to Dragon up until like Gen 6. Nessa manages to do some heavy damage to it, but has to switch out before being able to finish the job. And Claire uses a Hyper Potion as we switch to Ahab. Aurora Beam is Ahab's only stab move, so we go ahead and start spamming that. It does a good chunk, and Kingdra manages to get off a smoke screen before launching a Hyper Beam. However, that's not enough, and Kingdra goes down. So now there's just 2 more Dragonair left, and we switch to Wilbur, expecting a Thunder Wave, which is exactly what happens, and Wilbur's ground typing lets him completely eat it. Dragonair goes down to a pair of Powder Snow. The next Dragonair comes out, and this one is able to paralyze Wilbur using Dragon Breath, but goes down anyway to Powder Snow. And now we finally have... Never mind. No, we don't. We have to go to the Dragon's Den. So we find the old man, and he asks us a few questions, like what Pokemon are to us and what kind of people we'd prefer to face against. It's pretty simple to answer these questions correctly, and the old man forces Claire to give us the stupid badge. So, next stop, the Elite Four. Hey guys, real quick, if you're enjoying this video, then leave a like on it. And I'm always working on another one. So consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell so that you don't miss the next one as soon as I post it. But before reaching the league building, Giovanni Jr. challenges us to one final battle. Shade and Nessa manage to take out his lead Sneasel, and Betty nearly finishes the Magneton before getting paralyzed 3 turns in a row and having to switch out. Ahab comes in and finally finishes the Magnetic Menace. Nessa comes back in to face the Haunter, but I'm not dealing with Confuse Ray that she got hit with, and we switch out to No-No to finish the Haunter with Feint Attack. Nessa gets a chance to redeem herself by OHKOing the Typhlosion with Surf. Kadabra gets OHKO'd as well, and Golbat probably would have gotten OHKO'd as well if Nessa hadn't hit herself in confusion multiple turns in a row. No-No manages to come in and Ice Punch the Golbat into oblivion, and now it's actually time to face the Elite Four. First up for the Elite Four is Will, the Psychic Specialist. No-No manages to 1v1 the lead Xatu, Nessa finishes the Slowbro and the Jinx, and the Grass-type Exeggutor never stood a chance. And while Betty was dealing with the final Xatu, the Bitter Berry kicked in to counter a Confuse Ray. Yeah, something that I just randomly slapped on one of my Pokemon to clear space in my bag earlier in the game actually came in clutch, so that was pretty cool. Now up next is Koga, the former gym leader of Fuchsia. Betty faces off against Ariados and finishes it off with Confusion. Betty puts Fortress to sleep, letting Nessa come in for free, but the Fortress wakes up before going down and manages to set up spikes. Venomoth lands a Toxic on Nessa before going down, letting Muck come in and set up a Minimize. We switch to Wilbur to avoid toxic damage building up and manage to land a couple of Powder Snow. One of those Powder Snow manages to freeze the Muck, which lets Betty come in, who manages to land Confusion and finish it off. Crobat comes in and manages to deal heavy damage, but Betty survives and does take it out. That's Elite 2 of the league down, and the whole team is still alive and well. That brings us to Bruno. Hitmontop survives a confusion, so we switch to Shade to avoid the dig, and eventually Betty comes in to finish the Hitmontop off. Hitmonchan does its best with Mach Punch, but can't finish the job. And Betty trades out with Nessa against the Onix, which goes down to Surf. Hitmonlee gives us an attack buff with Swagger before going down, and that leaves Machamp. Which, thanks to Hitmonlee's attempt at winning, at least I think that's what it was doing, it goes down to a crit Body Slam without doing a single point of damage. So now there's only Elite 1 left, and it's the only Karen that people don't hate. She still gets memed on, though. Anyway, Nessa manages to body slam her Umbreon into the ground after a few turns. Vileplume takes both Betty and Nessa to take out, but out it goes. Gengar replaces it and immediately goes for Curse, which halves its own HP, which lets Nessa take it out with Ice Beam. Murkrow goes for damage, but doesn't manage to do much before going down. And Houndoom actually does pretty good damage, but still gets OHKO'd by Surf. And so it's time to face the champion. You know him, you love him, it's Birdkeeper Lance. Wilbur got Gyarados down to red HP, and then Nessa had to come in to finish it off. The first Dragonite came out and then immediately died. The second followed suit, and although Aerodactyl did its best, it ultimately failed. Charizard actually managed to do some decent damage, but couldn't finish the job. Ahab ate a Hyper Beam from the Ace Dragonite on Switchin, but the recharge turn didn't even matter because Dragonite fell to Ice Beam. And so we became the Johto champion. Hardcore Nuzlocke rules, not a single death, but we're not done. See, Johto is weird for a lot of reasons, but one of the cooler ways that it's weird is that there's 2 regions. One of the goofier ways is that the level cap goes down. Yeah, you know how we just fought a guy with a level 50 ace? Well, our next gym is going to be Janine, and her level cap is 39. Because of reasons, I guess. So how are we going to do this? Everything we have is over-leveled. Well, there is one ice type that we haven't seen yet, and Siri Knight has assured me that said Pokemon is in fact in Kanto. And sure enough, on Route 7, we find our frozen salvation, Articuno. And with that, it's time to face Koga's Nepo baby daughter. Rotisserie comes in and starts off strong by getting a freeze on Crobat and continues to do excellent by freezing the Weezing. The freeze chances end with the second Weezing though, and it lands Toxic, which is annoying. The Venomoth sets up a double team, but then dies, and then Ariados does its best. Soul Badge acquired. So let's skip over ahead to Pewter, where Brock's level cap is 44. Brock's lead Graveler goes down to just 1 Powder Snow, and out comes the most difficult Pokemon to deal with so far, Lord Helix. We spam Powder Snow hoping for a freeze. We don't get it. We do get a nice crit that does a lot of damage, and Rotisserie wins the 1v1 and makes short work of the Onix. Dome comes out next, and we finally get the freeze we were hoping for earlier, and so all the demon is able to do is stand there while we continue to whittle it down. Dome falls, and Brock's remaining Rhyhorn just falls as easily as the other rock and ground types, securing us the Boulder Badge. And this is where I remember something. We do have one other ice type that we could be using. Remember how Gym 7 back in Johto had the level cap of 31 for some reason? Well, Clamu was boxed after that gym. So we can add her back to the team for Vermilion's gym. His lead, Raichu, misses Thunder and gets hit with Attract. We take advantage of his fondness for inaccurate moves and Shellfish at this point to set up spikes. I tested it, we can only set up 1 layer in this gym for some reason. So it's time to do some damage in the form of Aurora Beam. Raichu either misses Thunder or doesn't attack at all until it goes down. Magneton then goes down to a crit Surf, and Electabuzz continues to demonstrate what happens when you go for power over accuracy. Electrode, however, manages to actually do some damage by going for Explosion. Lieutenant Surge throws out his second Electrode, but it fails to do much of anything, and Thunder Badge now acquired. So now it's time to go down to Celadon and face Erica. Her Tangeli somehow lives a fly from Rotisserie, but misses Sleep Powder and then goes down. Victory Bell manages to set up the sun, but doesn't actually do anything with it. Blossom manages to get off a 1-turn Solar Beam, but it doesn't do anything to us, and Blossom goes down. And that just leaves the quad weak to ice Jumpluff, and Rotisserie finally gets an Oko in this battle, which means the Rainbow Badge is finally ours. And so now we can finally go get the second gym badge of Kanto in Cerulean, where the level cap goes up to 47. Misty leads off with her Golduck, which unfortunately is female, so we can't immobilize it using Attract. But we can still set up spikes. It does way more than I would like it to by using Psychic, so Rotisserie comes out to finish the not-so-golden duck. Quagsire set up the rain, but even with the boost, all the Lapras is able to do is get off one surf. And when Starmie fails to do any better, our soggy chicken secured us the Cascade badge. Now, we're all familiar with Sabrina, right? The OP gym leader who's extremely difficult to beat in her home region of Kanto because of a lack of dark types to counter the super speedy and hard-hitting Alakazam. Well, about that. So we start off by having Clammoo scatter some spikes around Espeon's feet, and then Rotisserie sends it packing. Following that, Mr. Mime pretends to do something before falling on its face for real, and the ever-so-dreaded Alakazam just can't withstand any decently powerful physical move. Dark-type? Never heard of it. Marsh badge? In my pocket. Now, this next part is actually significant because the next gym's level cap is 50. Which means the members of our team earlier that we trained for Lance but that didn't actually participate in that battle can rejoin us as we make our way to Cinnabar. Or I guess now it's the Seafoam Islands. Now Blaine, unlike Sabrina, can actually be challenging. Primarily because his Arcanine has actual defensive stats alongside speed and power. So what is an ice specialist like me to do? Well, to start off with, spikes. I do love me some entry hazards. It helps that his lead is Magcargo here, which I do so wish was good. It has such a cool design. But alas, it's quad weak to Surf. And that Magmar makes a cameo appearance and out comes a Rapidash, which suffers from Alakazam syndrome, where it's fast and decently strong, but a good sneeze can topple it. And that's the Volcano... Wait, what do you mean that's the Volcano badge? Blaine, where is your Arcanine? That is your best Mon! That is what makes you a threat in the Kanto games! Where is the dog? What is this, Game Freak? What were you thinking? Time to move on to Viridian and level 58. Which means we can build the best team we can with all of our Pokemon. After Team Rocket disbanded and Blue was ousted as champion of Kanto after like 13 seconds on the throne, he was offered the chance to become the new Viridian gym leader. And he leads off with Pidgeot, which annoyingly uses Mirror Move on Attract. But still, that doesn't stop us from setting up spikes. And eventually we break through the infatuation enough to take out the bird using Aurora Beam. He then sends out an Alakazam, which is something we've seen before. And this one doesn't fare any better than the last one. No, just tapped it on the shoulder and it went to the ER. So now it's time to face the Arcanine that Blaine should have had, and it's time for Ahab to reappear and slam it with Waterfall. But not before taking massive damage. Okay, Clammoo, get out here. Okay, this situation looks really bad. We're gonna need the infatuation to come through. Wait, full restore? Crit? No, but the infatuation comes through and Clammoo survives. See, this is why Arcanine is a threat and Alakazam is a joke. Wilbur is able to deal with the Rhydon, and Rotisserie finishes off both the Gyarados and the Exeggutor, which finally gives us the Earth badge. And that means it's time for the moment you've all been waiting for ever since you realized that Lance was too far from the end of the video to be the final goal in this challenge. Having 16 badges, 0 deaths, and a level cap of 81, it's finally time to climb Mount Silver and face off with the man, the myth, the legend, Pokemon Trainer Red. Now, 81 sounds like a ridiculously high level cap until you realize that it's on a Pikachu, which sounds fantastic for us with a Piloswine until you realize it still doesn't have a single ground type move. Like, what the heck, Game Freak? Who designed this? Who okayed it? Whatever, Wilbur still takes out the little yellow rat with strength. Ahab comes in to eat a flamethrower from Charizard before firing back with Waterfall, and Nono deals with Espeon, getting a really nice crit through the Reflect. And now, Snorlax. Snorlax was actually the biggest wall for us. This thing is tanky as a mother trucker and actually has decent damage output. Over half of the time I spent doing this fight was on the Snorlax. It just wouldn't go down. And the fact it has rest for recovery actually makes perfect thematic sense, but I'm still angry about it. Anyway, while it's asleep, the only thing it can do is use Snore. So Rotisserie comes in to use a Reflect of its own to raise its defense somewhat, and that allows it to eventually take out the sleeping monster. Anyway, Venusaur never stood a chance against our Frosty Turkey, and Blastoise can't do nearly enough to Betty to win the 1v1. Even with Betty eating a Surf on Switch In. And so, we've defeated Pokemon Trainer Red and the super boss of Pokemon Crystal. And that means I've now completed 2, count them 2, hardcore Nuzlocks, deathless, using only ice types. Not bad for the worst defensive typing in the game, is it? Next stop, Hoenn. See you there. And as always, I am Ichigo90, and I am blasting off again.